From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politi and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start chopping.
Alrighty, everyone. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant, our Turkey Week podcast. 27-6 loss to Penn State that I feel like I've seen numerous times. It's just one of those games, fellas, where you go to interview the players afterward, and it's uncomfortable because there's really not any questions that are beyond the very obvious thing that happened here. Penn State is simply better, more talent. It's just better in every area, and it's just hard to come up with ways to grill a player on what happened when that's the answer. And that's kind of how I feel about this one. I don't know. How did you guys feel?
Yeah, similar. I mean, Penn State's defensive line is one of the best in the country, just absolutely filled with talent, twitchy dudes who just explode off the edge. How am I going to blame a kid like Reggie Sutton, who's a great story, but he has no chance against Chop Robinson, who's going to be playing in the NFL in a year or two, or the rest of the offensive line, which has been good this season, but you're towards the end of the year, players are falling down like flies because it's the 11th game of the year. You just played three of the best defenses in the country. Look, we thought that maybe Penn State would be demoralized because they just lost their season essentially by losing to Michigan. They looked pretty good. And when they're playing like that, it's really almost impossible for Rutgers to move the ball because they couldn't get anything going in the running game. And then the defense, as good as it played, that's about as good as they can do. And they gave up 27 points. So, yeah, they're just overmatched. I think if you get Penn State at a different spot in between two easier opponents, maybe you have a better chance when they're the third opponent you play in the toughest stretch of the season. It was just a really big ask, and it's not like you can really blame Rutgers for how things went.
Pat, there was that one stretch where Rutgers defense stopped Penn State on a first and 2, and then a 4th and 1, maybe 1.5. Just a great moment. You're like, all right, well, if something's going to happen here, maybe it'll happen. This could be the momentum shift, but the same story with the offense.
And that was what I was going to say about asking the players the same questions, right? It's the same problems that keep coming up week after week. So what are we doing to change it? How many times can you ask that question? But you're right. Like, the offense has just been uncompetitive against these really good defenses, and it really makes you question whether it's self-inflicted or is this just a result of playing great competition. It's very well documented that these three teams that they just played are statistically 8th or better in total defense. Mm-hmm. Giano kept calling them 3 of the 5 best defenses in the country, and certainly you can argue that, and there's no question. The question is, it's kind of a catch-22. Is Rutgers offense really that bad? Or are these defenses they're playing just that good? And it's certainly a little bit of both to me. But that's what you got to weigh here and figure out how you're going to evaluate this situation.
And it was interesting that, and Brian, you wrote about it in your film room review today, that you can make an argument that despite what we're saying, the 6 points, I don't think 220-something yards, that this might have been Gavin Wimsatt's best game against a top defense. He completed a season high percentage 62.5%, and adjusted was 73%. So we've been screaming, accuracy. He was better this week in that department. But he ran the ball. He ran the ball with authority. And there's that first drive, and you come back to this, and we've seen this, and Pat, you pointed it out about this team getting into the red zone against Ohio State and against Penn State, getting inside the 7-yard line and not scoring touchdowns. And you have that first drive. Gavin rushes it. He gets down to the 1-yard line. You think it's going to be, I think, 2nd and goal at the 1. And there's a holding penalty, and it brings it back. And now you're looking at 2nd and goal from the 17 or whatever it was. You're like, well, forget it. They're not going to score there. And it's just things like that seem to happen every game.
Yeah, you can't really afford to beat yourself if you're Rutgers, and that's what they've done in the red zone. They did it twice against Penn State, 2 killer holding penalties that make it impossible to get into the end zone. I let Jay Patel kick 2 field goals, though, and now he's on pace to have the greatest single season in program history, which is nice, I guess. I thought Gavin Wimsatt was good, and especially given the pressure he was facing. He had the least amount of time to throw of any game this season. Greg Schiano joked that on the sack he fumbled the ball. By the time he dropped back, Chop Robinson was already in the backfield to tackle him, just untouched. So he had dealt with a lot. The running game could get nothing going. Kyle Monunga had 16 carries. By my count, watching the film, 13 of them, he was touched by the time he hit the line of scrimmage. Like, he just had no space to work with. The offensive line could not contain Penn State's defensive front. And when that happens, it's almost impossible to move the ball. So I think that Gavin being able to complete those passes, he did get some help from his wide receivers. I thought Isaiah Washington had by far his best game of the season. A couple of really impressive. There was one circus catch. He catches the ball just before it hits the ground. Ian Strong made a couple of nice catches. So I thought the passing game, again, nothing spectacular. The numbers aren't great. But when you compare it to what they've done, when you put the context in of what they were facing, I was encouraged by Gavin Wimsatt. And even the first half of Iowa, if you include that, I'm not entirely convinced that this will make him a world beater. But compared to some of the discussions we were having in the last couple of weeks, I think if he puts together a good game against Maryland, a good game in the bowl game, there's some optimism, some hope going into next season. No?
Pat?
I would say, like, just to go back to my last point of like whether you truly buy what Shiano is saying, that they struggled so much because these defenses are that elite, versus okay, they played well enough offensively in games against the teams that they're better than, and that's how you just have to evaluate the situation. So I would agree with Brian if Rutgers does have two decently offensive games in the next two games, that you will say, okay, Rutgers offense was fine against teams that it was better than, and then non-existent against teams that it wasn't as good as. And that's just where we are.
I'm going to say the word fine is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And it fine. It will be fine. The running game especially will have been fine. The passing game has been below average, even in some. Go back and look at it, even in some of those games. To be fair, and again, I'm not. This is for the sake of discussion. You're right that it does. This is what you have to hold on to if you're a Rutgers fan. There's really not a plan B here. You have to think. Okay, Gavin Wimsatt will have taken a big step from last year to this year. If he takes another big step, you will have an average NCAA quarterback. That's what we're talking about. I think, right? We're not talking about. He's not going to take a step where he is. Michael Penix, he's not going to become, that's just kind of where we're at. And believe me, that is still an upgrade. But if overall we are talking about baby steps and you're still wondering, is this going to be enough to beat these teams? And I guess that's what it comes back to. Like, and everyone kind of got mad at us for kind of saying, oh, they still have a signature win. And I get it, but these are the teams are on the schedule. We've written endlessly about the 6 wins and how important that was and how this program will have made progress this year. But now you're looking at it like, okay, this is where you go. This is where you're going. This is what's on the schedule. You're never going to get a break really from top competition. Washington replaces Michigan, USC replaces Penn State. You're still playing difficult teams. And I guess that's what it comes back to. Will you feel comfortable that this offense will be better against those teams next year?
I do think USC being on the schedule is a big help because they may be the softest defense in America, and Lincoln Riley is going to maybe get fired after he lets Gavin Wimsatt throw for 400 yards against him. I agree with you. I think the next step is to have a quarterback where if he throws for 200 yards, it's not absolutely stunning. Gavin Wimsatt has thrown for over 200 passing yards in one game in his entire career against anybody, Wagner included. So
Michigan State last year, right? Is that what it was?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then this year he came close against Wisconsin. Rutgers had over 200 passing yards, but Evan Simon got that just over the hump there. And I think to the point of the competition, I think we have to we're talking about teams that Rutgers is better than and teams Rutgers is nowhere near against, right? Maybe Maryland and whoever they play in the Pinstripe Bowl, Georgia Tech, whoever, is that middle ground. And then we could kind of have like a more fair barometer to go against. And I think maybe Virginia Tech and Northwestern we're not giving them enough credit. I don't think they're world beaters. I think people are getting a little too excited about the fact they're going to make a bowl game, but maybe they're not terrible the way we thought they were in September. So, but I think those are the games we're going to have to evaluate after all this is all said and done. How do they perform against the okay teams?
Right. What do we think about? So there's so much discussion about the offense, and someone put it on Twitter, and I apologize. Whoever you are, you're absolutely right that it's possible to feel good about the progress and where the program is and still be very frustrated with what you're seeing offensively. Again, it was another very vanilla game plan. Granted, we talked about the first drive, moved the ball well. It seems like later in the game, once Penn State says, okay, this is what they're doing, then the offense, then there's none of that anymore. Second half against Iowa, second half against Penn State, the offense is not being productive in a meaningful way. We asked Greg Schiano about that, Pat, and it's one of these answers like where it's if you're tired of hearing him say it's a developmental program, turn off your radio. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and the game plan made it so easy for Penn State to be an effective defense because from our vantage point in the press box, you could see the defense that they were putting on the field and how many guys they dedicated to stopping the run. It was just so easy for them to put 8, 9 guys at the line of scrimmage on first and second down when Rutgers was going to run, and then have their edge rushers pin their ears back and get after Gavin Wimsatt on third down. It was just the most predictable play calling. And I think that's, if you're a fan where you can be very critical of this Rutgers offense, maybe the players and the development isn't there, but the play calling can be a little bit more creative, I think. And it's just so predictable, run, pass, and try to stay ahead of the sticks that it's becoming just so easy for the defense to game plan for this Rutgers offense. Everything that's on tape is if it's predictable to us and an average fan, think about what it's like to be a defensive coordinator on an opposing team. It has to be like, getting a word bank on a test. It's just so vanilla. And that's who Rutgers is. Like Greg Schiano has no hesitation to say, like, this is the offense we're putting on the field. This is the game plan we're putting out on the field. This is where we're at. And I think that's just the problem.
And I'm paraphrasing, but at one point he says, the press conference, everyone's screaming like, throw a screen pass. And I'm like, oh no, Greg Schiano's listening to the podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Everyone's screaming. He's talking to you, Pat.
I know.
Where's the wheel route? No, that's what we were talking about. Come on.
He said they can't even throw a screen pass because they're not there yet. And I was like, wait a second.
Right.
Isn't that the most fundamental play in football? Like, isn't that what Pee-wee football players are taught? I don't know.
And then the Giants beat, just to prove full circle, the Giants beat the Commanders with Tommy DeVito throwing a wheel route to Saquon Barkley. I just had to laugh out loud. They're screaming for these plays. Anyway, yes, but that's kind of where we're at there.
Yeah. There's so much dedication to stick with this game plan, to get to 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3 to be able to run quarterback power, that it's almost overkill at this point. It's sticking forks in your eyes, like watching this offense.
And Brian, tell me if you agree with this. There's like a fine line between when you're doing something to stay in the game against Penn State, like Greg Schiano saying, this is how we have to be competitive. And there is also, all right, well, are you so close to that line that you're not really putting yourself in a position to win, right? That's and this is what we used to scream about with Chris Ash in later years. And again, I'm not making a comparison. The program's so much further along, but it was like, all right, you got it. Now you got it down to 28-point loss instead of a 42-point loss. But you know what I'm talking about, right? There is a line there.
Yes, but I do think we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth where we want to say just suck normal and only lose by 21 points. Yeah. And then they're playing away so that they only lose by 21 points. And we're saying, oh, risk it. Who cares? You're going to lose anyway. We got to find a middle ground here. I think.
Are you saying this podcast might not be consistent in its views?
Certainly not in a lot of ways, but I think it's not just us. I think I saw a lot of fans say that, like, we're going to lose anyway. What's the point? Let Gavin Wimsatt throw the ball. If he throws 3 pick sixes, who cares? You can't win the game if you don't try, which I understand that argument. I think for us as people watching the game, for fans who are watching the game, I think it's frustrating to see a team not even really try, right? When you throw 16 passes and run the ball 42 times, it's like, especially again, when the run game is going nowhere, you're kind of like, why are you running your head against the wall so many times? But if you're thinking about it from Greg Schiano's point of view, you're thinking the only way we can win this game is if we keep it close and hopefully make the key plays, don't make mistakes, minimize risk. And there has to be, this is pure speculation, just conjecture on my part, but there has to be an element of a 27-6 loss looks a lot better than a 52-17 loss, for example. On people who are scoreboard watching, to recruits, to people who are mildly paying attention. And I think that does kind of matter, right? I think you can pitch like, we only lost by 21 points to Penn State. Rutgers wasn't going to win this game anyway. Maybe they should have thrown the ball all over the yard. But I do think that he's essentially admitting with these quotes he said the last couple of weeks of like, this is who we are. He's saying we don't have enough talent offensively at wide receiver, at tight end, on the offensive line to do anything else. We have good running backs who can run the ball. We have a mobile quarterback. And that's our strengths, and we're playing to our strengths. And until they upgrade the talent at wide receiver, at tight end, on the offensive line, which they desperately need to do, they can't do all of it, but they desperately need to upgrade those positions this offseason. And until they do, this is just kind of what they are.
First of all, we know that Rutgers doesn't upgrade positions. They develop talent, Brian.
It's in the pipeline, for crying out loud. Have you not been listening?
They do have young receivers that could be good. I don't know if they're going to be ready next year is the issue, right? Like, is Dylan Braithwaite and Fama Toure and Ian Strong and Jesse O'Fury, is it going to take them 18 months to be ready to play meaningful snaps? Yeah, I mean, they're playing right now with a fifth-year senior, former walk-on, a fifth-year senior Isaiah Washington, right? Like, Jaquay Jackson's been in college for 6 years. Like, that's what they're working with. To go from that to, a quartet of sophomores is a big ask. And there's no tight end in the pipeline, at least from what I'm seeing, right? And the offensive line, maybe. I think there are some young offensive linemen who, have a chance. But I think at all three of those positions, if you can go in the portal and get people that can play right away, that is the best course of action.
All right, let's do some true or false. Don't have a lot, but we've got a few good ones. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, true or false? And this, you talked about this a little bit a minute ago, Brian. Rutgers has offensive talent in the program. The players are simply too young to make an impact. Pat, is that true?
True. Yeah.
Okay. Brian?
I'll say true at wide receiver. I'm not convinced that tight end. I am 50-50 on offensive line. So I guess the answer is true.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to hope it's true, but it's interesting that you would think that some of those guys you would roll a dice. If you have 4 games for red shirt, I'm surprised we've only seen them in 1, but true. All right. True or false? The Rutgers offensive line is back as Rutgers' biggest weakness. Pat, are we down on the O-line?
No, I think that was just a product of a great opponent. I think they've still been, I think, wide receiver, to bring back my debate from the preseason, is still biggest weakness.
False. Brian?
I agree that wide receiver and tight end are probably a more big concern. This is 2 weeks removed from them pushing Ohio State around. Ohio State's a little soft, as much as Ryan Day wants to say they aren't. So take that for what it's worth. I think judging them, Greg Schiano made this point, judging them on how they do against Iowa and Penn State might be a little unfair. So I will say false.
I will say false as well. All right. With NIL, a 6 or 7 win season is becoming the program's new ceiling. This is a toughie. Pat, true or false? Has NIL made it the point where it's going to be much harder to compete with the behemoths?
The way that Schiano answered that question during his soliloquy makes it seem that it's one of his biggest concerns, and I think it is. So I think it's pretty declarative to say forever a ceiling. I'm going to say false. They've already developed a top 25 defense, and if they can just get the offense into the 50ish range, I think they can win more than 6 games.
Brian?
I think it's a lot harder to beat the Ohio States and Penn States and Michigans with war chests, for sure. Have you seen the rest of the Big Ten? This league stinks. They stink. Their 4th best team has the worst offense in modern college football history. They're putting offensive football back like 30 years, right? So I think that, especially with the way the new schedule is, when you're not playing the behemoths all in a row every season, I certainly think that 6 and 7 wins might even be the floor. That's what their objective is, right? To bring it back to the old days of Greg Schiano. And then the realistic ceiling, like the once a decade special season, is probably 9 to 10 wins. So I'll say false.
I say false as well, although I do think, and this is the point I want to make, that with NIL, it's, we just talked about, well, they need to upgrade these blank. It's going to just be a lot harder to do that. And you're not going to be able to pay for a wide receiver. We've kind of seen that. You're certainly not going to get a quarterback of any note. And you're playing defense with NIL. That's the other part of it. Like we haven't really discussed it, and we will at the end of the season with which players are going to come and go. But that's a big concern. Forget, like, Rutgers can be really good if it keeps the team together. That's a big if. So I guess that's why the worry with the NIL is out there at all times. So I will also say false. All right. Basketball, true or false? Bryant beats FAU. Princeton is rolling. That's a great sign for Rutgers hoops. Pat, you bullish on the basketball team? True or false?
Yeah. I am. I am a little bullish. Those results look great. I've been reading some things that the Ivy League is not going to be a one bid league, which I think is fascinating. So, yeah, I think and their performance against Howard all kind of stacks with the put the trajectory upwards.
Brian?
Bullish is good, yes. I was confused bullish and bear.
Bullish. Yes, it is good.
Okay. The Princeton loss looks better every time Princeton plays. They look awesome.
They look good.
And the Ivy League is really good. Yale is elite. Penn beat Villanova. Really good. Bryant beating FAU makes that win look a lot better. Georgetown needing to go to overtime to beat American a week after they lost to Holy Cross, and that being Rutgers' best win of the season, makes the whole 4-game win streak they're on a little less impressive to me. I think Rutgers is doing what they should do. They're beating bad teams, and they're generally avoiding scares. Like aside from the end of the Bryant game and the Howard game, where things got a little shaky for a little bit, like there was never really any scare. So they're doing what they should do, much like they did last season. I will wait to see how they do against competent competition, Illinois, Wake Forest, Seton Hall, before I declare that the Princeton game was an anomaly. So I guess to answer the question, it's false.
All right, I'm going true. I certainly feel better about it than I did when I walked out of Trenton, but I feel better about everything than I did when I walked out of Trenton that night. So let's keep that in mind as well. All right, 2 more. Penn State, an underrated road trip. Pat. Penn State College. It's underrated. We've been too harsh about traveling to Penn State. True or false?
There's nothing better than Crappy Valley. I will say that. This is so false. It is the worst road trip.
Brian, you were in the car with me for 4 hours. How do you feel about the road trip?
That's exactly why I will say true. Now it's the only road trip I can make in the Big Ten. I get to spend time with my good friend Steve Politi.
That's great. Okay, this is great. Of course, people know how I feel about this